Now we will listen to Professor Dr. Yunhee Lee. I would like to read her biography. Associate Professor Dr. Yunhee Lee is in the Language Research Institute and Semiosis Research Center at Hankook University of Foreign Studies and Doctor of Semiotics. She is a member of the Charles Sanders Peace Society and the International Association of Semiotic Studies. She is currently working on the project Peirce's Concepts of Semiotic Mediation and its Educational Implications, a study on narrative modeling and selfhood, supported by the Ministry of Education and National Research Foundation of Republic of Korea. Her research interests include Peirce's semiotics, Peircean narrative theory, self-narrative, narrative modeling, film semiotics, cognitive semiotics, theosemiotics, and cultural semiotics. She has many publications in these research fields. I leave the floor to Professor Dr. Yunhee Lee to make her presentation titled Aesthetic Behavior and Philosophical Sentimentalism in the Case of SF Narrative and the Self.
Okay, thank you for the introduction. I'm happy to present my paper in this symposium. I'll share my paper. Do you see my screen? Yes?
Yes, we can see, yes.
Okay. Okay. My paper relates aesthetic behavior to selfhood. Okay. I can see your face. Okay, let me. We'll just. Okay. So the motivation in writing this paper is derived from two ideas. One is the idea of mattering by Dorothea Sophia, and the other is ethical implication of narrativity in science fiction by Paul Ricoeur. The two ideas fit together in the pragmatic inquiry of the semiotic self in a developmental account from the Peircean perspective. I will explore the conception of the self as semiotic agency from practical to theoretical dimensions, bringing the two aspects of self-control and self-consciousness based on Peirce's method of categories. Dorothea Sophia quoted the High Court Judge Mary Godron. The matters that matter may differ depending on who is doing the mattering. And she developed the idea of mattering in connection with Peirce's method of categories. Sophia's idea of mattering is inspired by Karl Hausmann's value and the Peircean categories, in which he said, intelligibility would be blind without value, for it would be nothing but a collection of genres. It would have no context by virtue of which genres could be assessed and brought under the control of a condition for their interrelations. Hausmann's argument for co-presence of value and thirdness for intelligibility is explored in the relation of value to the categories in Peirce's classification of the sciences. Phenomenology and mathematics are the sciences with which and in connection with which the triadic structure of Peirce's philosophy as a whole is described and justified. The normative sciences of aesthetics, ethics, and logic rest upon phenomenology, and they deal with the value, what ought to be, or devalue, what ought not to be, in feeling, action, and thinking, which are allied to secondness. The connection of the self by means of a categorical method from phenomenological perspective differ from the perspective of analytical philosophy. This idea is also found in Riquelme's statement on ethical implications of narrativity in science fiction. Later, we shall ask whether a certain convergence of the literary fiction, which I assign to selfhood, and those of science fiction, which, in my opinion, concerns only sameness, is not reconstituted when one takes into account the ethical implications of narrativity. It is perhaps for us, too, a way of saying that identity is not what matters. Therefore, based on the convergence of the two perspectives from phenomenology and analytical philosophy, I shall look at the self as semiotic agency both in the subject of experience in sign activity and as a storytelling agent in narrative communication. These two layers of semiotic system shows the two levels of who is mattering and the doing of actual mattering, thus describing and prescribing a moral value based on aesthetic quality in a narrative world and enabling the representing of the world. In this line of thought, I will discuss three phases of the semiotic self. First, the biosemiotic self in aesthetic behavior. Second, value-driven activity of the agentive self. Third, narrative self for narrative communication of aesthetic quality in the case of the Korean SF film Jongin. Moving on to the next section, aesthetic behavior and the biosemiotic self. Thomas Sebeok's work on the semiotic self within the discipline of zoo semiotics allows us to see the conception of the self from the Peircean perspective of humans as semiotic animals. Considering whether long essay, Prefigurements of Art by Thomas Sebeok, Paul Coverley views animals' aesthetic behavior as a paradox, positing that aesthetic behaviors of animals are implicated in enhancing survival, but not enhancing survival. Then he poses a big question for us. What do we pursue in order to maintain an activity which ensures our survival but is not often used instrumentally as such? Coverley argues that the answer to that question lies in the realization that aesthetic behavior is a survival. And further, the topic concerns the nature of humans' existence and their instinctive pursuit, quoting Sebeok, which evokes Peirce's classification of science as a living organism. The propensity to classify seems to have acquired through evolution, diminishing survival value, but then so did sex. Human can enjoy either, but most tokens, though pleasurable per se, are not biologically relevant. Only the type of activity a clear-cut biological function. Sebeok proposed three justifications of the propensity to classify. First, the lack of classification is important for survival, biological survival. If the function of categorization is to sort out sensory experience, then the evolution of efficient classificatory technique is bound to be of survival value. Second, the relationship between parallelism and the classificatory animal is illustrated to distinguish prey from predator. And this is used as the organizing principle employed in taxonomical procedure. Third, beyond classifying their surroundings, animals also are attracted in particular to parallelism, being involved with something akin to aesthetic pleasure, even when the process or product is disunited from its proper biological context. For Sibyok, the semiotic self is equivalent with the animal mind in cognitive ethology, which is understood as a relational unit to the environment. This view is grounded on perceived semiotics, in which a sign is in the triadic relation between sign, thing signified, cognition produced in the mind. And the definition of a sign is something to somebody or something in some respect or capacity. Sibyok pays attention to somebody, which he thinks illuminates the semiotic self. Accordingly, Sibyok posited that the semiotic self was not located in the animal body. It was a result of semiotic process as open entity for development. According to Colapietro, on account of Peirce's theory of self requires consideration of his theory of individual, which involves the interrelated notions of substance and organism, as well as the mind, which is the ground for the account of the self. Following Colapietro, individual and substance are regarded as the same, being characterized by continuity and actuality of a reaction. And the mind's relation to the self is a relationship of genus species, which is not necessarily in the brain, but maybe in the system or in the world. The self as a sign, that is a third, is not reducible to secondness in the Peircean categories. Rather, thirdness presupposes secondness, which presupposes firstness. From this perspective, the mind can never be reduced to the body, though it does require some kind of embodiment. The next section is versus the philosophical sentimentalism and semiotic agency. Aesthetic feelings are succinctly observed by Duval, saying that we appropriate something by making our own. In this process, things reveal themselves as worthy of being appropriated. They accrue value, which naturally brings us to aesthetics. Further, value is associated with power, ownership, and responsibility, which implies the semiotic self as autonomous agency with powers of feeling, of being aware of anything, powers of action, of modifying something, and powers of habit taking or habit changing. Consequently, the semiotic self with those powers of organic substance is capable of influencing the growth of semiosis. Then, how can we explain this process of phenomena of the semiotic self as enduring and at the same time the autonomous agency for recognizing a certain value as a quality? At this point, we can rest on Peirce's concept of philosophical sentimentalism as his pragmatic advice about how an individual without any mathematics or theory of reasoning can best ensure his or her own survival, success, and prudent behavior. The idea of philosophical sentimentalism is that sentiment and reason are interactive to improve each other. To illustrate this, according to Peirce, the nature of development, the two is the same in terms of coming from experience, and their development take place through the instrumentality of cognition. The soul's deeper parts can only be reached through its surface. Through the instrumentality of cognition as the soul's surface contacting with the external world, the eternal forms will by slow percolation gradually reach the very core of one's being, the real self, influencing our lives in that they are ideal and the eternal verities. The view of philosophical sentimentalism enables us to see that soul's deepest parts of sentiments or instincts will reach out to the external in interaction with the theoretical reasoning for generalization of sentiments. So I'm moving on to the last section. the narrative semiosis as a model for identifying selfhood in the case of SF. I is an indexical sign referring to the self as an object, so that I has a power to cause production of an interpretation of what the self is. This begs an essential question: who is I? Therefore, we ended up with the notions of speaking, acting, narrating subject, and agency to answer the question, who am I? Implying self-identity. In an imaginative act of making resemblance, Wicked stated that one must therefore work out parallelism between two situations that will guide the iconic transposition of one to the other. Metaphorical resemblance can bring about fusion of difference into identity and networks of signification that are associated with the subject and predicate of literal contradiction. The semiotic self in a narrative world as an observer being observed with agential consciousness is able to see oneself as another. This will be possible by means of categorical consciousness of the semiotic self, which is different from the animal mind in the degree of capacity for generating genuine signs by means of phenomenological categories of a person, as in three persons in relations between I, it, you. The only version of Percy's categories with the three persons of the verb and the corresponding pronouns, which is I, it, thou, develops into his later version of the three categories of firstness, secondness, thirdness, respectively, representing a subjective worldview, an objective worldview, and the fusion of subjective into objective worldview. Based on this Percy's categorical method, the persons present in the relations in narrative world, as in I, it, and I, you, will be essential conditions for identifying selfhood for self-development. In other words, who I am, the self, will be determined by what I am, ethical moral agency. The science fiction can be called scientific fiction in terms of knowing by narrating, by way of thought experiments, especially on the topic of identity based on body-mind relation. In this way, SF film as a thinking image is considered to be an iconic diagram. For Peirce, diagram like a metaphor is of the nature of fusion, individual with general, token with type. But unlike a metaphor, which concerns semantic dimension of similarity, a diagram has a dominant feature for its structural similarity to show relations objectively. Therefore, SF film, regarded as an iconic diagram as operating iconicity, serves for the investigation of how sentiments as reacting to images and abductive reasoning as an act of imagination for thinking by reflecting those images are interactive to improve each other. Now, I have discussed the movie. There are three intentions of the discussion of identity in the case of Korean film. Let me give you a summary. The film is about the legendary mercenary Yunhee, who fought in a battle for a colony in extraterrestrial space in 2315. After being seriously wounded in a battle, the mercenary, also the mother of a sick child who grew up to be an AI researcher, was born again as an AI cyborg for an AI fighter. The name of the cyborg, Yunhee, seems to be deliberately chosen by the director of the film as Chung, referring to affection in Korean. The mother and daughter encountered each other as an AI researcher and AI cyborg at a humanoid institute for the Yunhee project. During the project, realizing that the cyborg retained the emotion of her sick young daughter, and knowing that the goal of the Yunhee project was cancelled to make the AI cyborg for sex, The AI researcher Yunhee helped the cyborg to escape from the institute at the expense of life. The first point is that there appear to be a feature of identity in the logic of relations, that is, I, it, and I, you. The film has the feature of a sentiment of love between mother and daughter. Their relation is a key point to observe in terms of the concept of sameness and selfhood. Thus, the aim is to reveal how the relation changed from I to I you, resulting in their minds being fused into co-identity. The relation of mother and daughter in biological organism changed that of AI researcher, AI cyborg, and social organism under Yunhee project, with the instrumentality of enduring agency of continuity and actuality of the subject, cooperating with the autonomous agency. The relation finally changed to the personal relation of self and other for self-development teleology. So here is the still image from the movie. It shows that the change from the relation of I to the I, you. The second image is from body-mind, from the analytical philosophic perspective, to body agency mind relation from the phenomenological perspective. Okay, the second point is that the problem of identity lies in cultural value, which is to be a large extent fixed based on convention or tradition. My intention is to reveal how the fixed cultural image of the sentiments of love between a mother and her daughter in Korea permeates in the act of interpretation in which a value is regarded as a habit. Accordingly, interpretation of relationship of mother and daughter tends to be focused on exaggerated emotional aspect rather than a diagrammatic image for inference for the relation. In this respect, the cultural values as habit function to block the way of inquiry, thus obstructing development into thinking with a different view. Although the AI researcher was connected with the AI cyborg, biologically through the sentiment of love, she proceeded beyond her sentiment of love, generalizing it, thus resulting in generalizing herself to become you as another through the action of deleting the memories of her young sick daughter in the cyborg Yunhee. Consequently, the sentiment of love, making them free from cultural habits, choosing their own action together. This is another way of saying that Yunhee chose to help the AI cyborg escape from the institute so that they would both be released from the use value of their identity, from their impersonal relationship, by resting on existential value, that is the aesthetic value of qualities of being. The last point, third, with respect to the ethical aims, I propose that the self-identity is recognized in narrative semiosis, which is associated with the narrative identity, by way of agential consciousness and the phenomenological categories of I, it, thou. For humans as habitable beings with finiteness, the power of agency lies in moral creativity based on freedom, aesthetic value, and feeling of ought to be in a narrative world to create the self and at the same time to reflect on oneself by way of self-control. In our narrative self, we can be other by imagining what it's like to be Yunhee, emphasizing the sympathizing with the character, which then become a habit of feeling. Considering the self as enduring and autonomic agency, the power of habit taking or habit changing is operative for self-development of teleology by means of a narrative semiosis. Concluding remarks. I'd like to conclude by quoting Sophia. Humans, through their ability to think, have developed the ability not only to react but also to respond. To the extent that we have free will, we alone, in this world at least, are responsible. We can choose. This ability humans alone have developed to extend beyond reaction and response is our aesthetic and moral ability. Narrative self, with the power of moral agency based on free will and aesthetic goodness, through narrative modeling, will make aesthetic value intelligible for the conduct of life. Then this will become a vital matter of mattering. Thank you.